Welcome to another exciting episode of the Getting Defensive podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat. And I got the name right this time. I just would like to point that out.
Did you get it wrong last time?
Yeah, I did.
Wow. I
think I've gotten it wrong every time. So
I don't really listen to you when you're speaking, so I didn't even notice.
Get that like tone deafness, right? For my voice. Great.
Someday
How are you
you're
doing?
going to fire me. Someday you're going to fire me from the show, but today is not that day.
That's right.
I'm doing great.
Just like
Thank
Silo.
you. That's right.
I am great.
Good.
I'm awesome. We have a great guest today, so I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce him.
And I'm going to do my best to get the name right. I respect people's names. I'm trying on this one. And it's not like it's a really tough name. I just suck at pronouncing names. So we have with us today a really cool guy, rysiek. Hopefully I did it fairly good. He is a well-known digital human rights activist. Thank you. Information security professional, sysadmin. Currently based in Reykjavik, Iceland, which I'm very jealous of. We were talking about that before the show. He dabbles in policy every now and again. He worked at OCCRP during the Panama Papers, which is a fascinating story he was telling us a little bit about. He also helped manage the .is TLD, which is the top-level domain for Iceland, which is kind of cool, I think. And now works as a senior operations engineer for Quad 9, which obviously we're not going to play too much in that space because, like you, we have NDAs and such that we sign. But welcome to the show. And did I miss anything important or get anything wrong?
No, I think that's basically it. Thank you very much, and you nailed the pronunciation. Well done.
You know what?
It's not an easy name to pronounce.
It's a cool name. I like it. I just want to get it right.
So welcome to the show. You've had some interesting experiences that I think a lot of people who listen to the show are probably very familiar with Panama Papers. And as we were talking about before the show, OCCRP was one of the first media outlets that had a copy of the papers. And I think there was a long process of kind of working through them and whatnot. So, I'm interested to hear if, I think that was a fairly small organization. What sorts of unique challenges from a, in information security perspective did you face, and how did you approach that?
Well, so first of all, yes, as you said, this OCCRP back then was a tiny organization. It had about maybe 20 people on staff, probably a little bit fewer, but a bunch of member centers. So independent media organizations, local media organizations in other places that cooperated closely, and some reporting was coordinated by OCCRP, right? That was the model. And so one challenge was this is not a singular entity. This is a bunch of entities working together. And how do you come up with policies that work for everyone? How do you come up with any kind of policy that you can enforce in any way? Another challenge, and that's going to be familiar to anyone working in InfoSec, resources, right? How do you get the resources that you need to secure the organization as much as possible, right? And when you're a tiny organization working on a shoestring budget, if you're tiny like media organization working on a shoestring budget, that is a whole different level of difficult, right? And another challenge obviously was that this was a tiny organization that was dealing with pretty serious threats, right? The stuff that was in Panama Papers was touching people pretty high up. So there were serious threats that we had to consider and somehow have some response to, some kind of response to.
Yeah. For those who don't know, just Jerry or whomever, a quick recap of what was in the Panama Papers, because this went very worldwide, very fast, right? And so it was of intense interest.
Right. So It was a leak of almost 3 terabytes of data, 3 terabytes of documents from a Panamanian company called Mossack Fonseca. And that company was focusing on setting things up for people who want to hide the money, basically, right? It was a legal company that was doing business with people who were not interested in other people, tax authorities, etc., knowing where their money is and how much of it there is and what it's doing at any particular time, right? And so that was obviously an extremely sensitive and extremely useful cache of data, right? Because if you have this kind of data, you can show this person actually owns this company, right? This politician actually put their money in a tax haven while arguing for less taxes or more taxes or something like that, right? That's both extremely politically charged and also extremely important for the public to know, right? Like money equals power, and you have to know how the power flows and where, right? At the same time, a lot of data, a lot of information in this cache was related to completely innocent people who just wanted to have some privacy, right? If you're a moderately wealthy person who might be, for one reason or another, susceptible to any kind of stalking, right? Any kind of unwanted attention that you really don't have to deal with because you're not a politician. You don't have this kind of elevated place in a society, right, where you actually have power. Then this kind of hiding of assets might not necessarily be as bad as in the case of an actually politically exposed person. So there were decisions that needed to be made by the journalists whom to write about and whom not to write about, right? That's one of the reasons why this was brought by the whistleblower to a journalistic organization and not just dumped online, right?
Wow.
And and another important thing is I think this was the first such large leak of financial data, strictly related to how money flows, where assets are hidden, and who controls them, right? And this kind of started a chain of other smaller leaks and moved focus or moved this topic into the spotlight a bit, which has ripples until today, right?
Yeah. So I imagine that made some pretty powerful enemies pretty fast.
Yeah, I would imagine so too, right? Nobody ever walked up to me and say, "You're my enemy now," right? But yeah, we've had to deal with some things while I was there. Yeah.
Were there lots of attempts, or maybe not even lots, but were there significant attempts to steal the raw data from you?
No, because we never really have, like, OCCRP as an organization never really had the raw data directly, right? There was another organization that got the leak and then provided access to the leak. So we had some data whenever the journalists actually pulled the data off of the system to work on it locally, right? But we never had the full cache. I don't think, I think that's the case until today, right? I don't know. But while I was there, I don't think we ever had the full cache of Panama Papers data. And I mean, that worked out, right? That took a lot of heat from us, away from us, which I was fine with, right? But yeah.
Interesting. So another one of your bits of background is running or helping to run the ISTLD. I'm interested in what your experience was there. That has always interested me in terms of that top level domains seem like a obvious target for all sorts of bad actors, and so I'm curious. Obviously there's probably limitations on what you can talk about, but what was your experience with that? Was it really, were you being pursued by highly sophisticated actors or not?
I don't remember ever noticing any specific attacks that were struck me as highly sophisticated at .is, but that doesn't mean that there were none, right? Obviously, you only know about things that you can observe, and you cannot observe everything. But the experience of working at .is, I remember, was very interesting because this was the first time for a very long time for me when I was the junior, and for very good reasons. Right? That was a very highly technically skilled, it still exists, right? A very highly technically skilled organization, and that was very interesting. And also a tiny organization that had a lot of resources, which was in a way opposite to OCCRP, right? And there was night and day kind of a switch. And also, it wasn't an organization that was as clearly pursued directly by highly resourced, highly sophisticated threat actors, right? What we mostly had to deal with there, like what I mostly had to deal with there, is implementing NIS directive and like going through all the bureaucratic motions on that side, and then also reacting to standard domain abuse stuff, and designing the DNSSEC signer system for the .is, which was also a lot of fun and extremely scary. This is one of the things that you design it, and then the day comes when it has to be deployed in production, and you're like, okay, is it going to take down the whole .is for 24 hours?
The whole country's counting on you.
Am I going to write my name in golden letters in the history of DNSSEC? Because that's what happens. Thankfully, that I was spared. And that transition from the old signers to the new signers went smoothly, and So yeah, completely different set of challenges than with OCCRP.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about some of those challenges if you can share them when you're at OCCRP.
Sure.
Like,
So
we don't want to get you in trouble, but whatever is shareable, we'd love to hear about.
I think if I get in trouble, it's all my own fault. So don't worry about that. But I think. So I'm going to share a story, right? I think that's a good story to share, where we did have a breach, right? At some point, one of the people working for the organization noticed that there's something weird going on with my mail system. What the hell, right? And they had the good sense to let me know, and I went in and I was like, okay, so somebody broke into the email to their mailbox and is trying to siphon off all of the data. And that was a person who had access to pretty sensitive information, right? So one thing is, it's very good to use an email provider that has sane defaults and sane approach to security. By what I mean that somebody broke into this mailbox but was not able to actually connect POP or IMAP and pull everything out, right? Because that's not how the user usually used the mailbox. So the mail provider's fraud prevention or whatever threat analysis systems went like, that is weird. Maybe we should hold off on that and verify that somehow, right? And that's what notified the user that something is amiss. But more importantly, when we started dealing with the fallout of this, the most important thing was like, okay, what could have possibly been accessed, right? What kind of sensitive information could have been possibly accessed, right? And so the person went through the whole mailbox and all of the folders and flagged all the emails that were in any way actually sensitive, might have contained anything actually really sensitive. And then it turned out that basically all of them are GPG encrypted, which was very nice, right? And after a bit of poking around and figuring out what exactly happened, we were able to piece together that some other organization that we were loosely working with had a full-on breach, complete data stolen, siphoned off-site, and a pretty massive thing. And in that data, there was a link to our Nextcloud instance, to a shared link, but with a password. And what the attackers really, really wanted, apparently, was that password to that one shared link, right? And when we figured it out, I went in and tried and decided, okay, what was the link to? What was it? What was it that the attackers were after? Turns out that they were after a draft of a story that was published a month before.
Wow.
Yeah, they had no idea what they're after. It was just in a context that they were clearly very interested in. And there was this one
Hmm.
link that was not on the system of the other organization that was targeted and completely owned. So they really wanted to get to this, right? And yeah, they were not able to. So still a breach, but uh, yeah, like not a complete, not a huge, not a massive problem. And my takeaway from that was never waste a good crisis, because that was when I was able to say, okay, you know what? I'm done with having conversations about this. I'm just turning on 2FA for everyone, right? And that was a good learning experience with what seems to be not a lot of very bad fallout, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, like another takeaway is that attackers are also incompetent at times, right? They sometimes don't really don't even know what they're looking for. They could have gone to our website,
Yeah.
like literally, and read
Right.
the story, like literally word for word. But instead, they invested time and effort into building a phishing site that resembled our login page and all of that. It was that, in a way, it was fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is that sort of a
Interesting.
typical thing that for a media organization you'd see people trying to get access to like pre-release of stories to maybe for whatever reason to game them or maybe short a stock or just figure out what's going to get out there before it's published?
I think like it's difficult for me to talk about other media organizations because I
Yeah.
only worked at this one, right? So it's difficult for
Sure.
me to generalize my experience, right? But
Yeah.
in the context of that one organization, I would say that most really targeted attacks that we've seen seem to have been connected to very specific, maybe not a specific story, but a specific direction of inquiry, so to speak, right?
Mm.
Because you go on you pick up a trail and then multiple stories can fall out of this, right? But it's a trail
Hmm.
and there are the same people involved, and when you have this particular group of people, suddenly you notice that, oh, now there's a few more attacks happening, and I wonder if that's connected. Probably is, right? But yeah, 2FA, never waste a good crisis. On the previous episode of this podcast, I think the guest said that yeah, when a good ransomware attack happens, the money bag opens for a year or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote. And
Yeah. Sure.
yeah, in our case, this was not about money. This was about making the decision, right? And convincing everyone that this is going to be an additional step while you're logged into your email and all of that. This is going to be a little bit annoying, but look at this. There are good reasons. This would have stopped it, right?
Yes, sadly, I think it's many people's lived experience that things like that don't change unless there has been some kind of an incident. And by the way, like I've been in IT for a very long time, and that that problem is prolific. Companies don't spend on disaster recovery until they have a disaster.
Yeah,
They don't. They So it's interesting that you say that.
I agree. I agree. Again, in our case, it wasn't a question of resources because we had everything. Like turning on to FA is not a resource problem, right? It's a convince everyone to jump through this additional hoop problem, right?
Yeah.
In a way, it's
Right.
not a resource problem, it's a political problem, right? Somebody has to make a decision that's going to be somewhat unpopular, right? And
Fair.
so in our case, that was the like as I remember it, that was the issue, and that got very quickly resolved after this tiny breach, right? But yeah, it's good. I mean, it's sad that, as you said, in a lot of cases, in a lot of organizations, in a lot of contexts, bad thing has to happen before you can actually start implementing things that you knew that you're supposed to implement anyway, right? But there was either lack of
Hmm.
resources or lack of political will or some other roadblock that could have been cleared earlier, but just wasn't because it wasn't seen as important enough, right? And just to be clear,
Hmm.
my experience working for CCRP was that 99% of the time security was really treated super seriously, and I really had very few roadblocks like this, right? So kudos to them for creating an environment like this. But yeah, this one time.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like everything's a cost, right? That's a
Yeah,
friction or a
yeah,
cost to a user, right? So, and business is about trying to manage their costs and spend
absolutely.
their resources the right way. So I get it. It's just it's a bit of a shame that we can't, as a business or an organization, learn from other people first, where we don't have to go through the same relearning pain of
Yeah,
having to touch that hot stove ourselves versus learning from somebody else's experience. But it seems to be the case pretty often.
yeah,
I think
very
that's where
too often.
regulations. I think
Yeah.
that seems to be where regulations often come in. And I know you had mentioned, I think with the IS TLD, you had you had to comply with NIS,
Hmm.
and I think NIS is moving in that direction, and I think NIS 2 is even moving even further in that direction. But it seems like that in absence of a breach or a near miss or something like that, it's regulations that are
Yeah,
the impetus for companies to either make the investment or the political will. Like I had an experience, and I've talked about this before, where a long time ago the CIO I was working for left abruptly, and I suddenly I found myself reporting to the COO of a company, and he told me he gave me a couple of things that I had to do, and one of them was getting rid of multi-factor authentication. Now this was 20 years ago, right? So it
mm,
was a while ago, but that wasn't a cost thing. That was a complete political, that was all politics.
mm,
And I think it's important to not underplay the significance of politics
yeah.
Yeah.
in our jobs.
Yeah, I strongly agree. One of the very difficult parts of my job back at OCCRP was like the carrot and stick issue, right? How do I create policies or get policies to be enforced while at the same time keeping people to trust me,
Hmm.
making sure that people are able to trust me and come to me when something bad actually happens, right? Because if I'm the bad guy who's enforcing policies with a huge stick, then they will like the people that I'm tasked with protecting, they will not feel comfortable coming to me and saying, I think I screwed up and there's this thing, right? Whereas
Yeah.
if I'm just a cuddly bear and not scary at all, then they will come to me with all the problems. But most of those problems could have been solved if they listened to the advice and implemented the policies that were already in place, right? So it's a very difficult balancing act, and obviously the management is always extremely important here, like the top level management, right? Which thankfully in this regard, OCCRP was doing pretty well. I cannot say that there's a lot to be complained about in this regard, right? So
Good.
that was nice. But yeah, the making those decisions is hard, and it's internal politics. It's also in some places it's ego, in some places it's oh, I have so much on my plate that I cannot deal with this additional requirement, and yeah, it's a cost. And also, right, so another thing is if you make it too complicated, if you make the friction too high, right, you want some friction, right? But if you make the friction too high, you end up with shadow IT, right? With people
Yeah.
setting up their own ways of communicating outside of your purview and outside of the systems that you've built. And yeah, it's a difficult balancing act.
Yeah. They just want to get their job done, right?
Yeah,
And they're
and
going to find a way.
nobody can blame them, right? Nobody can blame them,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
I remember a presentation at a conference. I think you may have been there, Andy. Um, I don't even remember where it was at. I think maybe it was DerbyCon, and the gist of the discussion was this person who I think was in leadership at a company. They focused first on usability. Like I think in fact they were actually talking about two-factor authentication, and their objective was to make it easier to use two-factor authentication than
Yeah.
not. And
Yeah.
I think that's one thing that we don't probably as an industry spend enough time thinking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the best decisions that I've made while at OCCRP was to deploy an SSO, because that meant
Yeah.
that at the same time I get better control of who has access to what, like in a single place, and at the same time it's way easier for people to log into things because now they only have one set of credentials, right? And then either they have access or not. If they don't have access to the thing, they call me and I fix it. Super easy, right?
Yep.
And thanks to that, I could trade this, like I could trade them, right? And say, look, the login to everything is now a single page and it's super easy. One set of credentials. Most of the time, you're like, since you're using it so much, most of the time you're going to be logged in anyway. So easy, right? But there's going to be 2FA on this. Right. So we're going to trade. We're going to have a trade, right? And you're going to like it and I'm going to like it and it's going to be great. And it was one of the best decisions that I've made there. So yeah, absolutely. And if you find this kind of a wonderful trade, wonderful balance that you can strike, on the one hand, you're simplifying your user's life, and on the other hand, you're making stuff more secure. That's such a win. That's such a win. It's not easy to find, but it's very well worth looking for.
So I'm curious too, like, so you're working here, you're doing your security stuff. It's, a typical media organization, and suddenly this super hot button topic shows up.
Mm.
And did you have any warning that this was going to be as controversial as it was, or did this just go viral and all of your alarms start lighting up?
So I had no idea I'm working on Panama Papers, or that the Panama Papers
Yeah.
is a thing. I didn't know that we're publishing anything extremely big until it got published.
Yeah.
Right. So I was hired into the organization. I wasn't the CTO, right? I was working for the CTO, and the CTO had this information, and he tasked me with some things like infrastructure and helping with information security, right? At the run up to the Panama Papers, but he was not allowed to tell me that this is what we're working on, right?
Wow.
So I was given a set of like, okay, you're like, we need infrastructure to be able to do this, and we need, this level of security and da 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 da. I'm like, okay, it's a media organization doing investigative journalism, writes about, pretty well known, dangerous sounding names from different places. It makes sense, right? We want to make this secure and we want to make this resilient, right? So we worked on that, and then finally the date comes, which I didn't know that there's a date, and stuff gets published. I'm like, oh, that makes all of the sense now. So
and
that was a
without
fun
getting to anything
surprise.
too sensitive, was what your CTO asked for appropriate to the risk, or were you like, whoa, we should have done so much more when you
No,
found
no, I
out?
think it was appropriate. I think it was fine. I think
Okay.
we
Yeah.
did the right. Like I think we took the yeah. He's a very smart guy and knows what he's doing,
That's
and
good.
he's also open to dialogue and input and all of that. So
Yeah.
so we were able to find the path that like of course the website crashed when we published because that's how things go, right? But my takeaway from that is if your website is down and you're in the business of publishing things, it's probably not a DDoS. You probably just published something popular, right? And you need to look into your caching or whatever, right? So yeah. But yeah, that was definitely an interesting interesting experience. But yeah, like I feel like we've done a decent job. Maybe not perfect, but a decent enough, and stuff got published, and yeah.
Was there a lot of attempts to sort of like DDoS it and take it down that you're aware of?
Yes,
Yeah.
not necessarily during Panama Papers, because I think the way I remember, obviously I don't have the stats in front of me right now, right? But the
Sure.
way I
Yeah.
remember it, everybody in the organization was asking like, are we being DDoS? And every time I looked into that, it's like, no, this is just organic traffic. This is just organic traffic that happens to be 2 orders of magnitude higher than our regular traffic. But there's a good reason
Yeah.
for that, right? The government of Iceland just fell because of what we published. So yeah, maybe there's some interest. I don't know. Maybe we published something big.
So the government of Iceland fell. Now you live in Iceland. Are you trying to take over the government? Is that the plan?
I can neither confirm nor deny. No, I'm not trying to take over
That's
government.
right.
No. I don't have the capacity to play that kind of a long game. Like I have a problem with planning for a month ahead, much less a decade ahead. So yeah. But thank you for
That's what the
asking.
supervillain would say.
Thank you for putting me on the spot here.
You heard it here first. He's trying to take over. Anyway.
You have to understand, Iceland is a pretty small country. I might not be able to leave the building.
Oh, no. Okay. This is a joke. I have a bad sense of humor. I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
Back to you, Jerry.
So I know one of the projects that you are involved in is Resilient.is or LibResilient. I'm curious, what brought you to get involved in that project. I know that from our interactions on the Fediverse that you are very concerned with the concepts of centralization, and I think that in general the industry regulators in particular are becoming kind of hyper aware of this idea of risk centralization and people putting all of their all of their eggs in different certain specific providers' baskets, and that was something that I wrestled with a lot as a CISO in my former role. When you look at providers that your own supply chain, in addition to how your customers are looking at you, they're becoming increasingly concerned with this concentration risk where if you lose AWS or you lose Cloudflare or you lose somebody like that, your entire business is at risk. So yeah. I'm curious, what drove you to this, and what is it, and how does it benefit us?
So as like a large part of my job at OCCRP was making sure that our website is live and kicking, and that the websites of our member centers are live and kicking. And that meant maintaining, say, 25, like hosting 25 websites, basically, right? And some of those websites were on a regular basis publishing something popular enough to be a problem. Some of those websites were quite often under DDoS, because that's just how things work in this particular neck of woods, let's call it. And some of those websites kept being censored one way or another by the powers that are in that particular country or that particular region, right? That was that where they're based or where they write about, right? And I never found a good solution to this, because the solutions that existed at the time, and we're talking about 10 years ago to 5 years ago, roughly, right? Those solutions mostly were either, you're self-hosting and good luck. And if you know how to set up micro-caching, you might survive to some extent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or at some point you go with a large front like Cloudflare or Google Shield or anything like that. Fun fact, when we looked at Google Shield at that time, it didn't even support HTTPS yet. Like that's how long ago that was.
Wow.
Let's Encrypt, I think, was 1 or 2 years old at the time. It was amazing. So yeah, I was fortunate enough that I had the capacity to roll out a small CDN of sorts, right? To have a bunch of edge nodes and some micro caching and kind of be able to do our own front for our stuff. But not every organization has that kind of capacity, right? And even with that, when the domain gets censored or something, your website is still not accessible, right? So one solution to one set of solutions were infrastructural, right? Put it behind a kind of DDoS protection thing, or put it on a CDN or anything like that, right? The other set of solutions is convince your users, convince people who are visiting your website to install Tor browser or install this and that extension in the browser or use this particular app on the phone. Or one thing that was very big at the time was, oh, every media organization should have their own app and the app should do censorship. Yeah, no, that's not going to work because building an app is extremely expensive, right? And then maintaining it, and then that's not going to work, right? And then convincing the users to actually do a particular thing is going to work for, 2%, 3% of people outside of very specific cases, like when YouTube was blocked in Turkey and everybody switched DNS providers, right? Most of the time, people visiting a news site will not modify their tech environment just because of that news site being down. They will just go to a different news site, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my takeaway from this is we have to find a solution that requires zero action from the visitor, right? The visitor of the website should not have to do anything, should not know that anything is happening, or maybe there should be an icon telling him, oh, this site is being censored, but we got you back, right? But there shouldn't be an explicit expectation that the user will has to modify, install something, right? Because that's just not going to happen for most websites, right? On the other hand, I definitely am not a fan of centralized solutions like Cloudflare or Google Shield because the politics, right? The decision is out of my hands as a website admin, right? And every now and then those companies also have some downtime that then I cannot do anything about, right? I'm just going to sit here and wait until Cloudflare fixes their stuff, or Fastly or whatever. And then there's the problem of oh, we don't like your site, so off you go, right? And good luck, right?
Mm-hmm.
By having some conversations, including with the then CDO of then CDO of OCCRP, who hired me into OCCRP, and now my good friend, I came to this realization that wait, service workers work. Like, service workers exist. I don't know how much you know about web technologies, but basically you can have a piece of JavaScript in the browser that installs itself in the browser and is kept there, even if your website has not been visited for a week or two, right? And then this particular piece of JavaScript can handle all the requests related to that particular origin, which means it can do a regular fetch request, or it can go somewhere else for that fetch request, or it can go through IPFS to pull that data, or it can go through whatever else works in the browser, right? But this means that as a website admin, I can set it up and say, okay, so here's a list of endpoints you're going to hit, right? This is the normal endpoint, right? And if the website is working, then this is where you get your data. But here's a list of alternative endpoints that you're going to hit if this one is down for whatever reason and inaccessible, censored, I don't care, right? If you cannot connect to this guy, connect to these guys, right? And try to pull this data. And this can be any kind of HTTPS endpoint out in the world, right? You could put your, I haven't tried that, but, and probably Internet Archive will not like me for saying this, but you could potentially use Internet Archive as one of the endpoints, right? And stuff would work because you're pulling the data. You don't care where from, as long as it's the data, right? And from the user's perspective, once you visit this site once, the service worker gets installed, it's working, and you don't even notice that that's something that be censored or not. Perhaps it's working a little bit slower, right? So that's the basic idea, and then based on that, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff like, well, now you can, since the service worker is handling all the requests, why not have service worker verify signatures on the data that is returned? Now you don't have to trust your endpoints. Now you can build a CDN with other organizations like you without having to trust them with your life about the website, right? Because you push out a signed content, and if the endpoint returns a signed content, you don't care which endpoint, and if the signature matches, you're good, right? So that would be the dream. That would be the dream, to create a kind of a decentralized CDN like that. But we'll see.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking out loud that some folks who are super paranoid to be like, I don't want a JavaScript worker sitting in my browser,
Sure.
but I'm wondering how many how few people actually would care. But have you had that conversation, or how have people reacted who are super paranoid about that?
I have had this conversation with my
Yeah,
strongest critic, which is myself. I am
sure.
anyone who knows me knows that I am not a huge fan of JavaScript. In fact, I hate the thing with the
Perfect.
power of 1,000 suns. Like you will not find any JavaScript on my blog. There's none, not a single line, right? But this is a trade-off. We were talking about trade-offs before. This is a
Yeah,
trade-off. This is a
yeah,
choice, right? And
sure.
on the other hand, the intersection, like the intersection of the set of users who refuse to run JavaScript and the set of users that are okay with installing Tor is basically the same set, right? So if you
Sure.
have
Yep.
if you're a media organization, I would say you need a multi-pronged approach, right? Maybe deploy
Yeah.
libresilient, and this will help you solve the problem or mostly solve the problem for most of your regular visitors. And then for those who do not want to run JavaScript, tell them to install Tor. By all means, have a Tor onion site. But every media organization should have a Tor onion site. Why not, right? Zip your
Hmm.
content and create a zip and just publish it on torrents. I've been doing that. It's not that difficult, right? If you have a static site, just zip it up together. Make sure that links are relative so that you can unzip it and just browse it from a browser locally and put it on the torrent. Boom, you have a way of distributing this through torrents and through sneakernet if you need to, right? So there are many ways that this can be like content could be distributed, and I feel like we're not doing a good job as people who manage websites. We're not doing a very good job at finding different weird ways of making content accessible to people, right?
So it's a fascinating approach. And I know, from my from my experience with with running infosec.exchange, which is not the largest website in the world, but pretty significant. You know, accessibility, and user experience across the world is very challenging
Yeah, yeah,
without
yeah.
a CDN, and so that's it's a really interesting approach. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah.
How much of
Well,
that is like? How much of that is live today? Like, how far down this path towards this distributed CDN are you?
there's a demo site for LibResilient, right? The code is
Yeah.
in beta. I would love someone to test it out on a live site, on a production site, right?
Yeah.
It took a while to get here, and it took a while to create the documentation. It's not an obvious concept, right? It's difficult to convince people
Hmm.
that this is one of the ways you could make your website more available, right? More
Right.
resilient
Hmm.
to problems, right? But and from the perspective of a website admin, right? If you're hosting a website like this, you're managing a website like this, you might not want to play with untested technology. You might feel like, ooh, do I really want? I don't know, right? It's a bunch of JavaScript. I don't know what it does and all of that, right? And so
Sure.
it's kind of difficult to get over this hump of like get it in production somewhere and test it out and see what happens. I know that the approach is valid because I know of at least one other project that has a somewhat similar approach, like simpler
Hmm.
and without all the signing and without all the larger CDN idea, but the service worker that pulls from a other endpoint than your origin site is a tried and tested technique that's been used in the field to combat censorship, and it works, right? So yeah, it's there for the taking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really cool idea. I really hadn't spent much time thinking about this problem or spent much exposure to it, and it's a
Yeah,
really
it's
intriguing problem set.
it's super weird also when you're on the running a website side, like if you're running a website that gets randomly censored or DDoSed, right? I remember a
Hmm.
case where a website that I was helping with was behind Cloudflare and was censored, and I was like, wait, hold on, how? What? How? And it
Hmm.
turns out that the main server, the backend server, was in the country that was censoring it. So the censorship
Um,
wasn't hitting after, like between the user and Cloudflare, it was literally blocking Cloudflare from reaching the backend server, right? Because you still have client hello and clear text server name indication, right? Which is another reason why I'm not a huge fan of the encrypted client hello thing, but that's a whole different topic. Yeah.
Interesting. So, yeah, I'm my mind is still spinning on the ideas. I guess it's I don't want to say it's narrow in its use, but it wouldn't work for a lot of like more interactive type sites. So where my mind went to immediately was I have a Proton Mail account, and it feels like every other day Proton Mail is being DDoSed off the internet. So like it's not something that would help with that.
Yeah, I mean, depends on what exactly is causing problem, like which resources are exhausted and by what, right?
Right.
It could help with the static resources a lot, right? Like ideally, I would love to get to the place where the static resources can be pulled from another user that has the service work already running and has those resources cached, right? Because then you have a fully decentralized kind of a mesh, right? But that's not where browsers are today.
But it reminds me, sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me a lot of like in the early days of the internet. And this is when we were naive and thought access to information was the problem. Turns out that wasn't the problem.
No.
You know, if something was, I always had this thought like now nobody can lie to us anymore. The truth will always get out because of Usenet. We had, NNTP or Usenet servers and whatnot that would cache it and spread it over there, and as long as there's an NNTP server around that had it, you could never get rid of it. You had millions of these or thousands of these around the internet, and the truth could never be suppressed because it was never centralized. It was distributed all over, and that kind of like that thought process is what's occurring to me. Is like it sounds like that again for really important static knowledge that you want to not have
for
suppressed.
very specific and I kind of try to make it clear on the website, right? For a very specific set of resources or kinds of resources, right? It's like this is a kind of system where if it's fully deployed, it's kind of difficult to delete something. Right? Like if it ever reaches the point where it's actually a mesh network between users, right? Then it's going to be difficult to delete something. So that's something that's on my mind, and that's I haven't gotten there. It's not going to happen anytime soon because browsers just do not support this kind of a use case. But if I start getting there, I will definitely have a serious some serious conversations with people that know more about this than I do, right? Like how to make sure that. Because I don't want to put someone in a position where I publish something by mistake and now I have no way of taking it back, right? That's definitely not a good thing. Or somebody published something about me and I need it down because it's harassment or some nasty stuff that right? So that's something that is on my mind, and that's one of the reasons why it's limited to static resources. Why it's not trying to be a replacement for, I don't know, Tor or some kind of a channel of a back and forth conversation, right? Because then when you have a conversation, then it becomes way more difficult and way more prone to problems, so to speak, right? To like, okay, somebody's using this to harass someone or whatever, right? But if you have just static resources that were explicitly put here's the bunch of static resources that we want to publish, then it's a very clear decision. This is what we want out there, and this is the end. These are the endpoints where we put it on, and stuff gets then distributed, right? So it's very explicitly for public static resources, and I'm trying to make this clear on the site also, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a fun way of playing with the much like very often ignored A in the CIA triad.
Yeah,
the availability tends to suffer a lot, I notice, whenever we're talking about information security, and I don't mean us here, right? I mean generally whenever there's a conversation about information security, somehow the availability part just disappears and just gets lost somehow. And and that's such an important piece of the whole thing that, yeah.
Well, if my server's down, it can't be hacked. I'm
No,
good.
that's true, and quite honestly, absolutely seriously, I used this tactic like during an incident or two, right? It's like, oh, somebody's trying to break into our systems or whatever. There's a phishing email out that is leading to a site that looks exactly like our SSO. I'm shutting the SSO down until I know exactly what's happening and how to, like this is, that's a cost, right? And it's a trade-off. Yeah. So also not hack, compromise, break in.
Sure.
Sorry.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Well,
But yeah.
I think we're just about out of time. This has been a really interesting discussion. I every part of it was pretty cool. I had actually, before this discussion, I had forgotten all about the Panama Papers. So it was interesting to kind of relive that. At the time, I was quite interested in it, and I think we talked about it on our old podcast. This was what 10 plus years ago.
Almost. No. It was 2016. So almost 10 years.
Okay, 2016.
So it's going to be 10 years.
I have this really weird perception of time right now.
Yeah. The pandemic kind of made all things weird on the timeline, but yeah, it's almost 10 years. So
interesting.
There's that.
Well, now Jerry's hiding all of his money in his orchids. So
that's true.
I don't want to know that.
You can see them back here. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
My
cool.
flowers. Yes.
Well, we want to be respectful of your time. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank
if
you.
If people wanted to find out more about you, how would they? What's the best way to find out more about your project or other stuff?
They can go to Resilient.is to learn about the project that we talked about, or they can go to my blog, which is
nice.
Which is a pretty awesome domain name, by the way.
Which will go away soon. Well, not soon, but like
hopefully not.
Maybe. No. I'm not panicking. I made a post on Fedi that was very clear that nobody should panic. It's going to take years before that happens. It took, I think, 5 or 6 years to remove .yu when Yugoslavia kind of became not a thing. .su is still a thing, right? Apparently, you can still buy new .su domains, even though it's been a while since the Soviet Union disappeared. So I'm not panicking, but there are other good reasons to move off of .io, and I was not aware of those when I bought it, and then I kind of built a thing around it, and it's difficult. So maybe this is the kick in the butt to actually fix it.
There's about 5,000 startups out there that are panicking right now because their entire company name is something.io.
Startups, Docker.io.
Yeah, fair.
Oh, yeah.
Just imagine all of the infrastructure. Just imagine all of the infrastructure that would just stop infrastructuring.
Oh my God!
That's going to be amazing. Wait, this is where I should do the. This is fine.
Right.
I should have some fire in the background or something. Like this is fine. This is yeah.
That's a crazy point.
It's going to be great.
That's going to be like a Y2K thing all over again. Everybody scramble to fix everything.
Yeah. Isn't Quay also the .io? Quay is the alternative to Docker.
Yep, and then GitHub.io is a.
It's beautiful. It's just
there's so much critical infrastructure running on .io. It's going to be amazing to watch it get unraveled.
Yeah. This is going to be a thing to behold. So maybe .io removal party in Iceland in 5 years.
I love that idea.
Yeah,
I'm there for that idea.
Let's do it.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again. It's been a great discussion. We'll leave links to Resilient. Is there anywhere else that you'd like to direct people to learn more about you?
No, I think the blog and the Resilient.is site is plenty.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you can find you'll be able to find this a link to this episode and all the links on our website at gettingdefensive.com, which hopefully won't go away anytime soon.
I'm gonna go get the IO domain for us too.
Yeah. Yeah. We should have
Anyway, thank you again, everybody.
Domain.
Right. That's true. This domain is currently endangered. We're breeding this domain in captivity. Oh man, we need a zoo of endangered domains. All right, I've got a new project. I'm working on it.
Yep. Zoo.
All right, we're trying to wrap up. I know we're trying to wrap up. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much. It was
Thank
a
you all.
pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure.
All right. Take care,
Until
everybody.
next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.